Today is International Women's Day, and the United States is marking the occasion by honoring 9 female activists from around the world who have shown exceptional courage and leadership in advocating for women's rights and empowerment. Among the honorees, the U.S. State Department is recognizing prominent Tibetan author Emira Woods for speaking out publicly about human rights conditions for China's Tibetan citizens. Woods is under house arrest by Chinese authorities. Meanwhile, in ultra-conservative parts of Afghanistan, some women's activists and female army officers marked International Women's Day Friday by taking a military helicopter flight over Kabul. In South Africa, hundreds of women gathered in Johannesburg with a message that violence towards women in South Africa has to stop. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and First Lady Michelle Obama are presiding over the Women of Courage ceremony today at the U.S. State Department. Also being honored are Nigeria's Josephine Obiajulu Odumakin, President, Campaign for Democracy, Somalia's Fartoon Aden, Executive Director, Elman Peace and Human Rights Center, and First Sergeant Malalai Bahaduri, the first female member of Afghanistan's National Drug Interdiction Unit. And just joining us now is Emira Woods to give us some further insight into what African governments are doing to make sure they respect the human rights of women in Africa. Emira Woods is from the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. Now, when you talk about women, I mean, it becomes like every time we associate women with suffering, with abuse, and today is a great day. What can you say about the significance of a day like this for an African woman?
Well, I think we have to say that women are the center of our families, of our communities, of our world. And without women, it's like, you know, half the sky goes away. So without women, not only communities in Africa, but really the world could not function. So we recognize that women are primary caregivers. They're the ones, particularly now, with a global economic crisis, it is women that are making sure there is still food on the table to feed the children. They are the ones that are the farmers. 80% of the farmers in Africa, but in many places around the world, in communities, particularly rural communities around the world, dominated by women in agricultural production. But we have to understand that women are exploring new fields, technology. You have a wonderful Kenyan woman who started Ushahidi using technology based in Kenya to actually bring about more crisis management systems, using the technology to advance how we as a human family function. So women are exploring all fields, and this is a day for us to acknowledge, recognize the challenges, but also to celebrate the enormous contributions of women as they forge new paths for peace, for economic justice, for stability throughout our world.
Yes. Now, when you look at situations like in South Africa, where, for example, the country has been called the headquarters or the center of rape in Africa, where women are being raped every day, but at the same time, you contrast that to countries like in Kenya, where, for example, we have the current elections. Every constituency is electing also a woman representative. So many women representing their people in parliaments in Rwanda and Uganda. What would you say about the efforts on the continent to kind of put the issues of women right at the front and center?
Well, I have to say, first of all, it is the African women's movement, the African women's rights movement that has made it possible to have new constitutions. Almost all the countries with new constitutions, whether it's Rwanda or Kenya or South Africa, Mozambique, all of those countries with new constitutions have forged incredible paths for women's political leadership. So South Africa has about 45% women represented in the legislature. Compare that to the U.S., where even this historic last election of 2012 brought the number to just 19% here in the U.S. But many African countries, it's well over 30%. And of course, the highest in the world is Rwanda. But we even look as we acknowledge and applaud the Kenyan people today. According to early reports, it's 47 women that have won in the parliament in Kenya. So there are extraordinary opportunities for women's political leadership to emerge, and they're really happening throughout the continent. But we have to understand that that's one important step. Women's political participation is one important step, but we also need to change attitudes that often continue to oppress women, particularly through things like rape and sexual violence.
And so would you say the governments are doing enough, though, to help stop that abuse, to change the attitudes of people who don't think that women deserve that kind of respect?
There is always more to be done, and it will take government and political leaders making vast steps forward. It will also take women at the community level, at the household level, saying no to violence, demanding that their proper rights. Remember, many of our societies are matriarchal, where women were the pinnacle of leadership within the community. We have to uphold some of those traditions of women's leadership in this 21st century, recognize and acknowledge the power, potential, and incredible opportunities when women unleash their full creativity.
And actually, this is sometimes the most confusing thing about the continent of Africa. We know that in some communities, even West Africa particularly, societies were matriarchal, and women held positions of leadership. They were powerful. But still, when the world looks at Africa, the African woman always looks like she's an oppressed woman. She's a miserable woman. She has no right to anything. Now, how do you explain to somebody who doesn't understand the continent of Africa what the real situation is on the ground?
Well, often the picture it needs to be demystified, right? Because the picture is complex. We have to understand that, back in the 60s, you had countries like Liberia represented at the United Nations by a woman, It was women in incredible positions of power from throughout our time, throughout history. But often those stories are not told. The history books are often skewed towards the male and Western writers that write them. So clearly we need to write our own stories. We need to do our own films and tell our own tales so that the incredible accomplishments of women, both now and those throughout history, get the proper recognition and acknowledgement that they deserve.
But how do you explain the marriage of little kids to older men, which you've seen is a problem in some countries, systematic rape of women in the DRC and northern Uganda, and of course in South Africa? Now, what is that?
Well, those are the challenges that remain. Women, particularly in conflict zones, women's bodies are the battlefield. This has to be challenged, both at the level of the communities where these atrocities are happening, as well as at national, regional, and international levels. We cannot continue to fight battles with women at the forefront, bearing the hardest consequences of those crises. So it is important to instill, legislation to make sure that there cannot be impunity to those who are perpetrators of sexual violence against women. There must be accountability at all levels so that women are able to live their lives in the dignity that they deserve.
Now, what do you say to those who think this is a cultural thing, that it is a weakness in the culture itself?
Oh, I think violence against women happens across class, across race, across ethnicities, and throughout this world. It has to be tackled in communities all around this planet, and it will take formidable leadership of women at the highest level of political office, changing laws, but also within families, within communities, demanding justice, demanding their rights, demanding their dignity.
In very few words, what's your message to all the women who are watching our show today?
Stay strong. Remember that your foremothers, they were incredible. Hold on to their genius, hold on to their strength. Let it empower you to do great things in the 21st century and beyond.
And the African woman is not a miserable woman.
Without a doubt, we are the force to be reckoned with.
Thank you so much, Emira.
It's a pleasure.
Well,
thank you.
Emira Woods is co-director Foreign Policy in Focus at the Institute for Policy Studies.